the Blairing Out with Eric Blair show, and today I'm pleased to have former Black Flag bassist, Emmy Award-winning dialogue editor, and current bassist for the band Dose, Roessler.
How you doing, Kira?
I'm doing okay, Eric. How are you?
I'm great. What kind of life did your parents provide for you?
My life? My parents, we had a kind of middle-class life. We were in, when I was born in Connecticut, my brother and I were both born in New Haven, Connecticut. And until I was 8, when we moved to Curacao, which is an island off the coast of Venezuela. Which was a little bit strange, a part of my upbringing. We went to school in Dutch. We lived there for 3 years. We scuba dived most every day because that was my dad did. He sort of got out of the rat race and he went into underwater photography. Then we moved to Northern California, where he took part in a business that was running scuba diving tours all over the world. And then my parents divorced. And at that time, of course, life got a little different. You know, the divorce had the same effect on our family that it does on a lot of people's family. The income situation gets a little harder, a little less, you know, upper middle, a little more lower middle class. And then after living in LA for a couple of years, my mom decided to move to the Florida Keys off a dirt road, and I didn't want to go. So she let me stay with my brother, and so at 15 I basically became a ragamuffin living in a crash pad with some guys. And I always say I was raised by wolves. It's not really true, but I didn't get the sort of traditional upbringing that a lot of teenagers had. I didn't have a strong parental unit. So I didn't learn some of the social graces you might learn. Instead, I was going to punk rock shows by 16.
So do you think that had any kind of long-term impact on who you became as a person?
Probably. I mean, yes, for a long time, especially in my teens and 20s, I was very insecure. You know, relationships were complicated because of daddy or because of the, not having mom around or whatever. But I thought I knew it all. So I thought it would be, at the time, I thought I had it all together. Looking back, yeah, I mean, I got into a lot of situations that were, that would have probably been avoided if it weren't for my choosing to kind of go out on my own too young.
Your parents purchased a piano when you were 6 and Paul was 9. How did that change your life?
It's funny because neither of my parents played music. My dad played classical piano as music, entertainment-wise. You know, he would listen to that. And then we both started classical piano lessons at those ages. And it's such a great idea for kids because, of course, it was quite easy to learn. A piano is like, one button is a note, so it makes logical sense even to a young child. And I always say that I got into bass because of the sort of left hand on the piano, and I'm left-handed. It all somehow ties together to bass and the bass lines, and I don't know if that's true, but starting music early meant, I had some fundamental understandings about music. I got frustrated trying to keep up with my brother, but eventually I figured out that playing bass, he needed a bass player at a certain time, and I thought, well, if I switched to bass, then I could be in a band with him instead of constantly competing for time on the piano, right? So that is what led me to jump on the bass, and I borrowed a bass, and I practiced to try to get good enough for his stupid prog rock band, which of course broke up before I was ever good enough. But, the rest is history. He got into punk rock, I got into punk rock. It was much better. You didn't have to be as good.
How did you discover the bass guitar, and what do you love about it?
Well, like I said, it was the simple answer is that Paul's band needed a bass player. I didn't know that I loved it until, I actually sort of borrowed a bass and started doing it, and it became this sort of, I don't know, for me, bass is this physical sort of manifestation of my emotions, and I can't, I've talked to Paul about this, I can never imagine that like playing it on the keyboard would have that same thing. It's that wrestling with the piece of wood and the strings that actually feels like you're emoting, which is probably hogwash, but that's, that is what it feels like. It feels like I'm expressing myself and I'm fighting with it, and there's this physical battle that goes on. And very early, of course, it was really hard because I wasn't any good, so I think that may have, my early teens were miserable. I was really miserable. So it may have very quickly become this thing to battle with. And in that way, it filled a need that I couldn't find another outlet for,
In your youth, did you and your brother Paul have a us against the world attitude and bond?
No, I would say it was, I'm the younger sister who's trying to tag along with everything, and a little bit competitive at times here and there, but of course he was 3 years older and male, so he was generally better at everything. He would beat me at every board game. He would, everything. He got better at piano because I fell behind and then I quit. It's it hasn't till we've been adults that we've started to be able to have that sort of let all that nonsense drop. No, I would say that it was never fighting. It was just, like I said, I was his little snotty little sister in a way, He probably would have been happy if I had moved away with my mom and let him just get into punk rock without him. I instead wanted to go to the punk rock shows with him and, wanted to join bands too.
Did Paul ever say, "Go away, kid, you bother me"?
No, he didn't. He encouraged me. We had a garage in our backyard after Mom was gone, and we had this sort of crash pad. We had this garage where we would jam at night, and I was really the only person who lived there was focused on bass, so the jams would happen and I would jam on bass. And he had a friend who had lived in Northern California who came down, and he was the guitar player, and we had our first band together when I was 16. So Paul and I tried to do bands together. So it wasn't so much go away I don't think, but there wasn't it wasn't you and me against the world. I mean, he had, I would guess, he was, he had a goal and a dream about music, and I'm not sure that we had the same one about music even.
How did your first band, Wax, with your brother Paul come about?
Just want to be clear, that's Wax with 2 X's. That came about because we had, this guitar player had moved in, and Paul had this long-standing friend, William, whose name was I Am a Man. And I named myself Candy Cane, and it was just like we gotta have a band, We wrote songs, and it just, our idea of what punk rock was, he knew Paul Beam, later Darby Crash, from high school, so we had been to shows at the Whiskey and stuff, so we were like, well, that's what our goal is, to start a band. That's what people were doing. We would go to these places, these holes, and see, people that had started bands and were doing things, and so that was a natural next progression, was start a band, write some songs, and then play live, So we did.
What do you remember about your first gig at the Whiskey A Go-Go when you were 16?
I was wearing a bicycle chain. I hadn't cut my hair off. Mine was still long, but my brother and the guys cut theirs off and saved it in little coffee cans and threw it on the audience because we thought that was punk rock. And mine wasn't even black yet. It was just long and brown. I had the bicycle chain on. And there were a couple songs that I sang, I screamed, that were my songs. And then I remember that at one point the guitar player kind of came up behind the singer and kind of kicked him out into the audience because he thought that was punk. And, so it was just an episode of us all trying to fit in a way, like if you were, they were a little older than me, but it was like trying to fit into a new clique, and we're not sure how to do this, but like we're trying to do our best to create this impression that we're all hip to the vibe.
What personalities and events do you recall from your time hanging out at the Canterbury Apartments?
Oh, I spent very little time there. We got a bunch of stuff stolen from there, but I was generally at school. Like I was still in school at that time. So Hollywood High was just right down the street from there, was there, and then the Mask, which was the club underneath the Pussycat Theater, I would go there. We would practice there. I actually created this deal where I would kind of let the owner have a break from being there, and I would stay there and like let people into practice spaces and collect money. And it's really weird, like even ever since I was a kid, I've been the like reliable one, the common sense one, the trustworthy one. I don't even know how it happened, but this guy trusted me, and we had this deal. Like, he would feed me lunch, which was sometimes hard to come by at that time, and I would stay and I would cover for him until the evening. So, so I was pretty focused. It was like, my deal with my mom was I had to get decent grades and not rock the boat with Paul, or I'd have to go live in nowhere, Florida, like down the dirt road on the Big Pine Key, which is not even near Key West. We're talking about nowhere land. So I didn't want to do that. So I was kind of a goody two-shoes. It was like, go to school, get good grades, earn the because somehow it was up to me to earn the practice time for my band. And so I would earn free practice time, and I would get lunch in return. And I would practice, and so there was not a lot of hanging out at the Canterbury. There were people there I knew, so occasionally you might meet someone there, go by there, but I didn't spend a lot of time there. We were between locations when we stored some stuff there and got it all stolen. Not at all, but anything of value. So yeah, I can't remember spending a lot of time. Now, there's a photo of me from very early days that was taken, I think, in the elevator, either there or at the Mask, by Alice. She did my makeup, which I never did myself. She was living with Nikki Beat at the time, and I played in a band with him for a little while, but I think this was before it. It all gets kind of fuzzy in terms of the exact dates, but the truth is I just can't remember spending a lot of time in people's apartments hanging out, or there wasn't a lot of parties there per se. It was, people either lived there, pay rent there, or they were going across to the Mask or to other places in order to go to gigs and stuff like that.
What band were you in during that time?
After Wax, Paul joined the Screamers. The guitar player who had been in Wax and I started a band called The Visitors, and we got a singer who had been in a Devo video. His name was Spaz Attack, right? So he was the singer, and we got a drummer, and we did some shows. But that was, so that lasted a year maybe, and then that kind of fell apart, and then the same guitar player and I started the Monsters with Nikki Beat and this guy named Leroy Jones. But we never could play a gig because Nikki insisted that we had to headline the Whiskey because he came from the Weirdos who used to headline the Whiskey. So we never actually got to play a gig because of that. We tried to headline the Whiskey, but they didn't want us to because we didn't have a draw. So we did that for a while. And then we had a band called Twisted Roots. Paul had a band called Twisted Roots that I played for several times, 3 different times. So, it's this succession of band after band. I had an all-girl band, Sex Sick, that I was constantly trying to make work, but when it comes to girls.
What was your relationship like with Pat Smear during your time in Twisted Roots?
I love Pat. Pat is, I have a very soft spot in my heart going all the way back to when he was in high school with my brother. I can remember, I have one really specific memory when I was still in junior high of Pat running through the halls of Emerson Junior High going, Kira, Michelle, looking for us as we're in class, and that, and kind of running in this very effeminate way. And that was just, he was so, and is so willing to be himself, and so many people are sort of caught up in this, putting on this front. I got nothing but love here for Pat. Now, with that being said, there were a couple of times when I could have wrung his neck, practice, and then you show up for the gig drunk, but, that's not uncommon in the story of all of these bands, and I don't know if it's nerves or I don't know if it's just that's part of how we have fun, but I always sort of took it a little bit more business-like, a little bit more seriously in that way. Why practice it really, really hard if you're just going to screw it all up, but that's so much few and far between memories. What I really just have is a lot of warmth. And Twisted Roots did this reunion show way after the fact, and it was so good to see Pat because it had been so long, and we all just kind of go our separate ways, so it's always good to see people. I'm very sort of antisocial, stay-at-home person, so when something comes together, it is always nice to see certain people.
Of course, Nirvana and the Foo Fighters. What do you think of Pat's mega success?
I think it's great. I don't think, for me, there's absolutely no rules in how you conduct your life in terms of, I don't believe there's such a thing as selling out. I don't think you have to have a hard life. I don't think you have to, fit into a certain cubbyhole for me to think that you are my kind of person. It's just you are. I think we all need to find what works for us, and if that works for him, why not?
When you guys got Twisted Roots back together, was it like you had never been apart?
Well, yes and no. And personality-wise, it certainly was weird to be, pulling out the old songs and trying to, play those bass lines and and we had 2 practices, so it was a little bit intense. But I won't forget this. My brother decided, well, we'll just transpose this one song into a different key. And I was like, this was a song that had this huge, complicated bass line in it. And I'm like, no, we won't. I will not do. But of course, with Paul, because he's my big brother, I'm not able to be just, no, we won't. I get hysterical, because he hits me at that level that very few people do. My ex-husband and my father probably. So I got, probably I felt inadequate because I couldn't just transpose the song. But to me, that was you just don't know what you're asking for. And I've got one practice, and I like to have everything. I don't jam ever, in my bass playing ever, in dos ever. I have the parts worked out. It's I'm not comfortable doing free-form jams on stage, for a lot of reasons, but mainly because I'm too uncertain about my ability to just think on my feet and do something cool, So, so that happened. But yeah, and in a lot of other ways, when we actually did the performance, it was in a lot of ways no time had passed, just in that moment, which can happen sometimes playing live. It's sort of everything sort of falls away, and you're just in the emotion of the music, and it's rare, but it happens.
What do you think makes Pat Smear a great musician?
Gosh, he's always been such a great guitar player. I mean, when he was first starting, he was learning from, Yes Records and, stuff like that. He's just always sort of a guy that sat around and, worked his guitar. I wouldn't say he takes it seriously the way, I was describing myself. And yet I wouldn't call him unnatural. Like, there are some people who, darn them, can't, don't even have to practice at all. I can name names if you want. But I think he does work at it. But he has this innate sense of being the glue. It's almost like a bass guitar player sensibility, where it's like how to be the glue to connect things. And that's a very specific skill that oftentimes you only hear with bass players, where they sort of, if you took it out, it wouldn't quite work. But because they're sort of tying the drums and the rhythms and the melodies and the singing, and it's all kind of tied together that way. And he has that ear to go, oh, I should do that thing because that kind of brings the voice and the drums, It's hard to explain.
How did Twisted Roots come together?
Oh, that was all Paul. Paul is the author of that and made it very clear, this is my band. So I was merely a hired gun without the hire.
What motivated you to fight so hard to establish yourself as a bass player in the punk scene?
I don't know that I fought to be a bass player, in the punk scene. Like, I watched in the early days, there were a few bass players I really admired. There was a band called The Eyes, and Charlotte played a Boo Blue Rickenbacker, which I eventually bought, and then she went to guitar on the Go-Go's, go figure, because she was a good bass player. But there was a gal in the Alley Cats, right? Really strong bass player. So I was inspired a bit by this idea that, even back, I never saw her, but Susie Quattro, and there were these, so it was, in a sense, a strong woman thing before there were really a lot of strong women, to look up to. And I don't know that that was a conscious thing, but there it was. My motivation was more, I want to play in bands. Like, it was like I'd show up early to the gigs, try to roadie for them, try to help them, because I didn't have any money to go to the shows, and because I would meet people who played, and maybe I'd eventually get in a band. Like, it was just sort of, that's what, I'm a bass player, I need to get in a band. It was the calculation wasn't how to become even a great bass player or a noticed bass player, as just be in a band, get to play. It's like, that's what, I'm a bass player, I want to play, and so when I'm not in a band, I'm trying to get in a band, So it didn't feel like climbing some ladder or anything.
What kind of satisfaction did you feel once you got off stage from playing these shows?
Depends on how they went.
Okay.
Look, when a show goes good, it can be really satisfying. But I didn't have a lot. I wouldn't say that I had a lot of really great, satisfying experiences. I mean, Twisted Roots did have couple of, decent sized shows at the Whiskey and stuff, but there was a lot of just kind of slogging along in the early days, and so the satisfaction sure was we played well, or just sometimes just getting through and not making mistakes, or not making bad mistakes, or, depends. Like with the girl band, like just getting through the set was a big deal, So, the satisfaction, again, the bar wasn't that high. It was get through the set. It was, did it sound good? Did we get any kind of response from whatever audience might be there? and am I going to get yelled at afterwards? Depending on who I'm in a band with, that can happen when it's not my band.
As a roadie for the Screamers, the Germs, and the Avengers, did you partake in any of the partying?
Well, I wouldn't say as a roadie did I participate. I mean, yeah, I had my, I was on my experimental journey when it came to partying, but it wasn't necessarily because of the band. Let's see, you brought up the Screamers. I had one incident there, and let's see, the Germs. No, I mean, I certainly wasn't the way, Darby would just take anything that was handed to him, and I didn't spend a lot of time hanging out with them. I would go to the shows, and I would sit up front because it was, theirs was tended to be the kinds of shows where, the guitar cord could get unplugged or something like that, where it just helped to have somebody kind of focused. So I would almost do the opposite. I'd know that they were paying less attention, so try to pay a little extra attention. And then the Avengers, they would come down from San Francisco, and again, a lot of it had to do with not being able to afford to go to their gigs, but I would show up early and I would hang out. I went to San Diego with them a couple times, but I would say not real heavy party band, drinking, there was a lot of drinking going on, but again, when you're broke, you can't really afford to drink in the clubs, and plus I was underage most of the time, so then you have to buy bottles and hide them and stuff, and so there was some of that, but because I was, a girl alone a lot of the time, I couldn't really afford to get too wasted for obvious reasons. So I was probably more of a goody two-shoes than most.
At that point in your life, could you quantify who Kira was?
I was going to school every day, remember, still too. So I finished high school. I went to UCLA. So my goals were simple. I wanted to keep that going, and I wanted to go to shows and be a bass player, So that's a full thing, You're just juggling it. It's like, so back to this other point about partying, I often couldn't stay as late at the party because I had to get up and go to school. So, there was this kind of strict thing for me about how to measure success, and success was getting to participate in all that stuff and not have it affect my schoolwork. I was in the school bands in high school, I played in the jazz bands, I was going to classes and getting decent grades, and so it was all sort of filling me up with not a lot of extra room.
So you did have a modicum of peace in your life.
Oh, I was emotionally miserable. So no, I wasn't peaceful, but I was, it was about control because, probably partially because Mom had been gone for a while. So it was this control thing. I just have to keep the ducks in a row. But no, I was miserable emotionally, as most teenage and 20-year-old women are, I was just suicidal. I never thought I'd live to 25, I did all of that emotional stuff, but by trying to control the, playing with bands, showing up to practice, getting to the gig, keeping my equipment together, doing as much as I get into school, doing as much as I could on the outside. And that's kind of been my story, is keep it together on the outside. No one will know that you're a mess on the inside, right? Isn't that the goal?
So what are your most vivid memories of your time being a roadie in the early punk scene?
So going with the Screamers to New York, very early when we got to the club, we were like, wow, there's no spray paint on the walls, so we spray painted, and we got in a bunch of trouble for that. Ended up, basically, our whole salary got taken away to pay back for the club's paint job. And I think me and the sound guy dropped acid while we were there too stupidly. We dropped acid and then had to like go like lie down and try to sleep, right? So we're just like lying there, like, okay, we're going to sleep now because that's what we have to do, because we're at some loft place in New York. You can't just wander out and go trip out in New York, right? So there was that. And the Avengers, I don't remember a lot, except at one point I decided that, I really kind of wanted to get vengeance on them, so I unplugged the PA system. I don't know why. I can't explain it. It's like these love-hate things happen. The Germs, yeah, I was really just loved those people. That was more of a connection with those people because I had known them for longer. So it was more about trying to take care of them and worrying for them because they like to party and they like to, and the crowds were a little rough and tumble and stuff. So that was a exercise in trying to sort of create a care where I could, for them. But I don't have any specific memories other than, wishing he wouldn't keep taking everything he got handed to him. And, the first show we went to of the Germs, he, was breaking bottles and cutting himself and, of course, stepped on one and we had to take him to the hospital, but get some stitches. But, punk rock.
Was that the whiskey show or was that the show at the Mask?
It was a whiskey show. That was the first show I saw of the Germs. The first punk rock show I saw. So I was kind of new. The Forming had just come out.
How did you help your brother, Paul Roessler, get in the Screamers?
I'm sure he would disagree with that. My memory of it, I'm just going to start with, my memory of it was that I was talking to KK, drummer from the Screamers, and his girlfriend at the time, now wife, Trudy, and he was in the. I was finding out that he was in the only keyboard band, and they were kind of. I think he was griping about the guy who was playing keyboards. And I said, "Well, you should talk to my brother. He's been playing keyboards and piano since he was just a kid, But that's my memory of it. I'm not sure Paul would give me credit for. That's one thing Paul and I often struggle with, is that we remember things differently because, it's all kind of strung back so far that memories get hazy. But I could swear that's what happened. I'm going with that. Yeah.
How did Michelle Gerber-Bell become the singer for your band Sex Sick and later Twisted Roots post Maggie? Who were the other members?
Okay, so Michelle and I go back to junior high. Okay, so first off, I knew her before I was into punk rock. So she was the other one that Pat was running through Emerson Junior High calling for, because she and I had gone to Pat's house. We had rode our bikes over from my mom's house over to Pat's house with his mom, where he lived with his mom, so he goes back. So Michelle was my best friend going way back. So I think it was, I'm going to go with it was her idea to start an all-girl band, because I don't think I'm a tomboy. I don't, and I was right, but anyway, I didn't ever think of doing a all-girl band. I think that was hers. And she put together a couple of other people. There was a drummer who had been in the Go-Go's and I guess had been kicked out of the Go-Go's, Alyssa, and she found a guitar player, Melissa, and we wrote songs. There were my songs, and Melissa and Michelle wrote all the lyrics, and we each wrote some songs, and we practiced a lot. Tried to practice a lot. We didn't do a lot of shows. So on and off, we were, trying to make that work. But it was hard for us to get gigs. People didn't know who we were, which is always the struggle. How do you get recognized if you're not recognized? And, that that thing. The second go-round of Twisted Roots, I mean, Paul knew Michelle, and he knew Michelle had been in Sex Sick. So my guess is that he just went ahead and asked her. Now, she was dating Dick Denny, who had been in the Weirdos, who became the guitar player, right? There were 3 iterations, you see, so it gets complicated. I'm going with that. I'm going with Dick's, I'm going with Michelle, and me, and Paul, and I think Gary was... Because Gary was in Sex Sick after Alyssa just couldn't show up to practice and stuff, so he was in both bands, because for a while there was some overlap between Sex Sick and that version of Twisted Roots.
The Blairing Out Show.